to a special edition of Global Lens from Qatar. Qatar as a country has been the center of Middle East diplomacy. It is here where for the last 2 years there have been negotiations to end the war between Israel and Hamas. The US, Western powers have all been a part of negotiations. Very recently, Israel had also carried out strikes on a Hamas target here in Qatar. There was anger over the killing of a Qatari citizen. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel also apologized to Qatar for that strike. How will that incident change the security dynamics in the Middle East? What is Qatar's hope from the Gaza plan in the next few weeks? I caught up with Adil Abdul Ghaffar, the Director of Foreign Policy at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs right here in Qatar. Listen in. Thank you very much, Adil, for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, Israel and the Israeli Prime Minister have apologized to the Prime Minister of Qatar for the strike against Hamas here, which killed a Qatari citizen. How does Qatar see the apology, and how does this really change how Qatar views Middle East security and also Israel for that matter?
I think the apology was welcomed because this was an unprovoked attack on a country that is working on very hard to mediate the conflict and the horrible genocide that is happening right now in Gaza. And actually, the mediators, the Hamas mediators that were here with approval and the knowledge of the US and Israel. So that's why the attack came as a big surprise. And also, one Qatari citizen died in such attack. So I think the apology was very welcome, but it has to be followed by concrete steps from the Israeli side to de-escalate the conflict in Gaza. And not only in Gaza, but also Israel has been engaged in attacking Yemen, Syria, Lebanon as well. So things we want to move towards de-escalating all of the regional issues.
Considering that for the last 24 months, Qatar was trying to mediate some sort of settlement between Israel and Hamas and end the war, and then a strike took place on Qatari soil, will this now create a strong mistrust for the future between Qatar and Israel, and even Qatar and US for that matter?
I think this trust can be rebuilt, and it's not just only here in Qatar, but also the Israelis have attacked the negotiating team that was negotiating for Iran between the US and Iran, and attacked Iran during this negotiation. This highlights really how the Israelis have trying to torpedo some of these peace initiatives that are happening across the region. But right now we have President Trump pushing for the ceasefire and an end to the conflict in Gaza, and this is happening right now. Currently the negotiators are in Cairo trying to hash out a deal, and potentially by the end of this week we may have this end of this horrific 2-year conflict in Gaza.
So Israel continues to strike Gaza. According to reports, more than 20 people have been killed. What's your view on how the Gaza plan can be implemented? Can it even be successful in the current circumstances?
Well, I think the plan is not perfect because right now it just ends the conflict, and there's the next plans, the next steps are not really taken into consideration, especially the international force that's going to look after Gaza, the amount of humanitarian aid. But at the same time, we want to end this genocide that is happening right now. So an imperfect plan is better than no plan. But we don't want to go to the occupation that we had before October 7th and so on. We want to find a long-term solution for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict that is durable and sustainable.
Right. What do you think this attack by Israel does to regional security, and now what is Qatar likely to do in order to perhaps defend itself in the future?
Well, I think when it comes to Qatar and the GCC at wide, there are 3 specific approaches that each country has done. The first approach is to seek deeper security guarantees from the US. And we've seen that come out from the recent statement by the White House on Qatar. That's going to be closer defense cooperation coming from that side. The second thing is also diversifying their security guarantees and security architecture. So we've seen also in that regard the Saudis seek this defense pact with the Pakistanis as well. So countries are going to be increasingly diversifying their security posture. And finally, there's going to be an increased push to cooperate between the GCC countries. So we've seen the summit that has happened here in Doha. And after that summit, the defense ministers from the Gulf Cooperation Councils have signaled that there will be closer cooperation between the defense defense ministries and the defense establishment of all of the 6 GCC countries. Of course, such cooperation already happened within the US security umbrella and the CENTCOM presence in the Gulf, but I think what we will see in the coming period, increased cooperation outside of that CENTCOM and US umbrella between the 6 GCC countries.
Do you expect a NATO-style pact between Arab nations to protect themselves?
Well, this Arab NATO has been spoken about for years. I don't see it really happening because each country has its own security threat perception, security posture. But I see within the GCC that there could be increased cooperation, and perhaps Egypt and Jordan can contribute as well. But because simply all of these Arab states have different perceptions of security, different political alliances and so on, so I don't see an Arab NATO per se happen. But I see definitely increased GCC cooperation on defense and further investments in the Peninsula Shield, which is the GCC defense force.
Right. The Saudi-Pakistan pact, do you get a sense that more countries in the Gulf could sign such pacts with Pakistan, considering it is a nuclear capable nation? It has a trained military. Do you think Pakistan could emerge as a net security provider?
I don't think GCC-wide, because Pakistan has, of course, its own domestic challenges, has its own issues, its own region. And I think the Saudi-Pakistan deal has to be understood within the context of the historical relationship between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And actually, many Pakistani soldiers were involved in the war in Yemen as part of the GCC force there. So I don't see this becoming a GCC-wide. It really relates to the particulars of the Saudi-Pakistani relationship.
Right. Do you also feel that the Israel-Hamas war over the last 2 years has disrupted the security architecture in the Middle East?
Yeah, 100%, because lots of the countries, there's been, after the end of the Gulf crisis between GCC states and Egypt and Turkey and others, there's been a bit of a detente and a return to normalcy. And I think what has happened since the beginning of this genocide has really upended all of that. We've seen the conflict extend to Lebanon, to Syria, to Yemen, to Iraq, to elsewhere. So there's a huge instability happening in the region now that we would like to de-escalate. And the de-escalation starts from the Israeli side. You know, if you recall, there was the Abraham Accords a few years ago that sought to re-normalize relationships between Arab states and Israel. All of this has been on hold now, and further expansion of the Abraham Accords is on hold pending the end of this ongoing genocide in Gaza.
Right. Now, when it comes to this week in Middle East diplomacy, what do you think will it take for this war to actually stop? Do you expect the Hamas to release all the prisoners, the war to come to some sort of end this week?
Well, one can only be hopeful, and the negotiations are happening today in Cairo. But I think from the statements of Hamas that we've seen on the media, they have indicated that they will release the hostages, that they do not want to retain control of Gaza. But there are some sticking points, because the US plan proposed an international sort of oversight committee and the involvement of Tony Blair, who does not have a very good reputation here in the Middle East. So what Hamas have said is that they want to hand over the governance of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. And I think there's a wide alignment on this from all of the Arab and Muslim countries, that power and governance of Gaza is handed to the Palestinians, not to Tony Blair and his colleagues.
Right. Finally, why do you think Israel continues to strike Gaza when we're entering such a crucial week in trying to end the war?
I think we have to reflect on the domestic politics of Israel, because many in the right-wing coalition of Prime Minister Netanyahu do not want to have this deal. They actually, if left to their own devices, they want to push out Gazans out of Gaza. They want to overtake the West Bank and so on. So I think Netanyahu is giving a bit of free rein for his right wing to highlight how they're engaged in conflict until the last minute, because he has to sell this ceasefire also to his domestic constituency, because his coalition may break. And if his coalition breaks, he may be out of power, and if he's out of power, he's legally liable for a number of corruption cases and so on. So I think the domestic lens really impacts the international, the regional and international picture here.
Right. Now, finally, Qatar and most Gulf nations have very close trading partnerships with China. How do you see the Qatar-India relationship right now, both in the context of trade, when we're trying to negotiate a trade agreement, and secondly, in the context of security, when the security architecture among GCC countries is changing rapidly?
I think the relationship has been very strong. India is increasingly a major partner for all of the GCC states. Of course, India's strongest relationship in the GCC is with the UAE, but increasingly has been deepening its engagement. So I think that it's very promising. Of course, there's a bit of a trade imbalance given the LNG imports to India, but I think increasingly I'm seeing more Indian cars on the road, more Indian products and so on. And I think it's only uphill from there. Having said that, in the same time, I think there's some disappointment that has come from the region, from India, especially since the beginning of the war in Gaza. We have a historical perception of India, a very passionate one about the role of India during the non-alignment movement. Myself, as an Egyptian, always have very fond memories of the Bandung Conference and so on. And I think under the current government in India, which has arguably taken a bit of a more Israeli response, this has had an impact on India's reputation, maybe not at the government level, because still the business is good, the political relationships are very good, but maybe at a people-to-people level where it may have been affected. Not all is lost. People still are very fond of India at the leadership level, at the people level, and I think hopefully at the end of this conflict we see the resumption of this people-to-people ties.